Hello, everyone. In this tutorial, Gabby is going to introduce all of you to some basic text structure in TEI using the Oxygen XML editor. So, Gabby.
Great, thank you, Christopher. So yes, I'm going to, in a moment, share the screen and show you my my Oxygen XML editor, which I've got open. Before I start with editing a file and showing you how to insert a few basic elements into the file, I just want to say a couple of quick things. One is that while I'm typing, you'll be able to see any command key combination that I press in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. Well, let's start, and I'll explain as we go along. I also want, before we start, to explain how to create a new TEI file. So Oxygen, if you're using the Oxygen XML editor, this will really help you out. So I'm going to just create a new. No, that's not what I wanted to do. Sorry. Create a new file just by either going to the file menu and selecting new, or in this case, you'll have seen the keycap combination Control-N in the bottom left corner there. And from the list, rather than just creating an XML document, which will create an empty XML document from here, I'm going to go down through the framework templates, which are offered here, and scroll down to TEIP5, which is the current version of TEI, and simply select the top one of those, which is all. So this will create an empty or almost empty TEI file, which in which all of the elements in the whole of the TEI are available, 500 and something elements. As I do that, you'll see here's the file that's been created. You see it's not entirely empty. It's the minimal TEI file that will validate. So all the required elements are in there. You can get rid of some of those elements and replace them with more complex things, but this is the minimum you need in order to validate it. So we will, in other tutorials, look at things in the TEI header, but for today's purposes, I'm not going to look at those. We're only interested in the text part of the TEI file, which contains a body. It can contain other things as well, but the body is the thing that contains the text you're transcribing, and the body has to contain somewhere in it at least one block level element, of which paragraph is the simplest example. So they've put in a paragraph in here so that it validates. I'm going to get rid of that paragraph because we don't actually want that for our purposes. You'll see now that body is underlined in red because it's invalid, because it doesn't have any block level elements inside it yet. We'll fix that once we produce it. So that's one thing you'll notice about Oxygen, is that you will see your XML file is periodically will be temporarily invalid while you're in the process of adding something, and it'll become valid a few seconds later as you've finished adding it. So I'm going to, for the purposes of this, I'm going to copy from a file in another window, so you didn't see me do that, but you saw the key combinations in the bottom corner. Some lines from a manuscript. It's not actually from a manuscript, but for the purpose of this exercise, let's pretend it's from a manuscript, and I'm going to paste them here into the body of this TEI file, and you will see that they are still invalid because they are not they're not marked up yet. They're not in a block level element. What we have is I've just got text inside the body of this TEI file. The other thing you'll notice that I've done a couple of times now is that if you triple click on the name of an element, it will highlight that entire element, which is useful if you're not sure where the end of that element is. So it takes you all the way to the end of that element, and you've got that triple click, and then you can do that either to insert an element around it, or to delete it or move it, or various other things. So this body needs to have some other content in there, which is easy enough to do. We've got here the head of the title of the document, the title of the book, which is a head. So I'm going to, the easiest way to insert a new element is to press Command and E, and you'll see that appear there, and then simply to type the name of the element I want, which you may not be able to see on the screen there, but I've just typed head, and there indeed a head appears. So head is now valid. Body is still not valid because it contains text that is not in these block level elements. So we can just tag these as what they are. Would you object if I tag this as another head, Christopher, or is something else you'd rather call it?
Fine with me.
Okay, let's call that a head for now. Chapter 1 is also a head. It's a chapter heading, but we'll come to that. So as I'm now entering head for the third time, and I'm going to have more of these later. Here's another head, the head of chapter 2. Rather than every single time pressing Command E and then typing in head and entering it that way, I'm going to show you another keyboard shortcut, which is Command and slash, or Control and slash if you're using Windows, and that will enter whatever the last element you entered was. And so it'll just repeat the last action in that sense. So that's all the heads, because I've only put in 2 chapters of the Portrait of Dorian Gray in this document, I think, playing around earlier, I accidentally got rid of a line break, but so we've got all 3 heads up there, which we'll come back to structuring that in a minute. We then want to tag the first paragraph in the document as a paragraph. So again, I'll type Command E. The tag for a paragraph is simply a P, and the red underline disappears from under that, and this is no longer that's no longer invalid. And then I can do the same for the following paragraph. Just Command up. I didn't highlight it. Command slash. Command slash. Command slash. You'll see here that I've truncated this chapter, but every paragraph up until the end you will want to tag that way. Some more paragraphs in chapter 2. Only a couple more. If you're not fussy about where the spacing is, you can of course just triple click on a paragraph and press enter the paragraph there. That puts the paragraph tag before the indent and the closing paragraph tag on the next line. That doesn't matter. It's still valid XML. It's still valid TEI, so that's not a problem. It's less neat. It looks less nice on the page, but it's a hell of a lot quicker to enter. And you might decide to just be sloppy and leave it like that, as I'll leave that part like that. So so there we've got heads marked as heads, paragraphs marked as paragraphs, and that's about it so far. A couple of things I want to add. Firstly, you'll notice that the head of chapter 2 is invalid. So there's a problem here with having a paragraph followed by a head followed by a paragraph. TEI has a rule which assumes that a head must always appear, a heading must always appear at the beginning of a division that it is the heading of. That's probably true 99% of the time, but TEI assumes it's true 100% of the time, to the degree that it will mark your file as invalid if you don't do it. Some people would say that was a bad idea, but TEI have decided that that's essential. So you can have a head at the beginning of a body, and you can have a head immediately after another head. But if there's anything intervening, then it's no longer valid. So those 3 heads at the top are fine. However, what we want to do, therefore, is to put each chapter, including its head, in a division element. So I'm going to put all the content of chapter 1 there, up to and including those truncated paragraphs there, in the division element. So Command E to call out that menu. Div is the name of the element, and I had caps lock on, so it put that in uppercase, which I didn't want. Do that again. TEI, as all XML, remember, is case sensitive. So div and div would be 2 different elements, and the div with a capital letters you can see there is underlined in red because it's not valid. It doesn't exist in TEI. So having put a div around the first chapter, you now see that every single paragraph in the second chapter is invalid. This is because of another TEI rule, which is that if some of your text is in a div, all of your text has to be in divs. So that again is a rule that is probably true 90% of the time in humanities texts, but TEI requires it to be true 100% of the time. So I'm going to highlight the second chapter and again, put that in a div, and that should now stop being invalid. I don't think there's any invalidity in this file anymore, which doesn't mean it's finished, doesn't mean it's perfect, doesn't mean everything in it is true, but it means it's valid to the schema. So that seems okay. A couple of things.
It's the happy green square, right?
Yeah, there's a green square up here in the right-hand corner, which tells us that it's valid. I could also click on the validate button here, and in a few seconds it'll tell me down at the bottom, document is valid down here. So a couple of other things we could do. We could, if we wanted, number those chapter divs. After all, the chapters are numbered. So we could say, and remember that if you put a space immediately after the name of an element, that will call up the menu of attributes that are available. The n attribute for numbering an element, we can say n equals 1. Notice that chapter 2 is still valid. There's no rule that says if you number one div, you have to number them all. But as an internal rule, we probably do want to say we want to number them all. So I'll number div number 2 there. Some people would now say that head of chapter 1 is now redundant because we've already numbered that chapter there, so we could just delete that. And if this were my own book, I would just number the divs rather than putting in the chapter headings like that, because I could put those chapter headings in automatically as part of the publication process. However, if I'm marking up a manuscript, which for the sake of this exercise, we're pretending that I am, the fact that Wilde, or whoever the scribe of this manuscript was, wrote chapter 1 in all caps at the top of the first chapter is information we want to keep. So we will put that in there consciously, even if it's redundant with this in there. We could make it doubly redundant by saying this div has a type of chapter as a attribute, and it's now redundant. So if we weren't marking up a manuscript where we care about all the text in it, we could just delete that. A thing you might have noticed, by the way, is that occasionally when I'm hovering over an opening tag to as I'm talking about it, you'll see this this weird block suddenly appears, this pop-up appears on the screen that I wiggle my mouse around to make it disappear because it's obscuring what I want to show. But what this is actually doing is I was hovering over div at that point. It will give you a definition of this. It'll tell you that text division contains a subdivision of the front body text or back of a text, which is useful to know. And it also tell you the link, this blue text. Sorry, I made it disappear again. This blue text. Okay, I can't hover over the blue text, but if you could get to hover over that blue text, it'll give you a link to the part of the TEI guidelines which has that that information. I can get it by pressing F2 to stop it disappearing, and it'll take you to the TEI guidelines. Okay, last couple of things then for this general introduction. As this is a manuscript, we're pretending. We care not only about the paragraphs, but we care in detail about various physical visual features of the text, such as where each line started in this handwritten text. So we might want to say, not only is this the beginning of a paragraph, but there was, a new line at each of these places. And notice that I'm not using Command E to enter those LBs this time. I typed the first one by hand because typing angle bracket LB / angle bracket was just as quick as typing Command E LB enter. And then I'm just copying and pasting the thing multiple times. And I'm not going to do this 100 times to go throughout the entire document, but you see the point. And you could number those lines as well, just as we numbered the chapters. If you wanted to say this is line number 1 on the page, etc. But you don't have to, and so forth. The last thing I want to show, and Christopher may have some other ideas, but the last thing I want to show is that in chapter 2, much of this chapter begins with dialogue. So there's quite a bit of dialogue in here, and there are speeches, direct speech, and the speakers given. So If we wanted to tag this a little more semantically, there's nothing wrong with marking this up, just using the quotation mark character in there as was written by hand by the author. But we could also make this information slightly more semantic. We could say, for example, that this this text here, "You must lend me these, Basil," is enter text is a quote in quotation marks, I should say. And you know, I can do the same for the next part, command slash, and so on for all the other parts. I could be a little bit more semantic again, and I could call it speech, which I should have checked. Can speech be inside a paragraph? Let's find out. So this piece of speech here is the SP element, which says that it's a speech. No, it can't. So we'll have to get rid of that. So speech is block level, so we'll have to get rid of the paragraph. So is that invalid as well? Apparently it is. Christopher, do you know the solution?
Well, I've only seen SP elements used in drama. And typically in these kinds of texts, you'll just see Q elements for speeches.
That's true. Yes. So
although you can use an SP element in poems.
Yeah. You could use it in prose. It's just a question of exactly how you nest it that I'm temporarily forgetting. So let's not.
Oh, it's a speaker. Sorry. You have to nest a speaker element within SP.
Oh, it has to have a speaker in it, otherwise it's not valid. And then it has to have the text of the speech in another tag.
Yes.
So well, in this case, there's no speaker. So let's in an empty speaker tag. And then what does the rest of the tag have to be tagged as?
A P.
So that then does want to be a P. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you could do something like that. And I guess, is speaker required? Could you not have speech inside just a P inside? Yes, I guess you can have speech without a speaker.
Okay.
So I was just trying to do it the wrong way around. So yeah, this speech, because of course a speech can be made up of multiple paragraphs, which is why a paragraph is inside.
Oh, that's okay. Sorry, I just looked it up. It is a global. It's a core. It's part of the core module, so it can be used in any structure. And you're right. It was the P that was needed.
Yeah. The issue with using speech here, of course, is that a lot of the text in this paragraph is not speech. Right. So only this part. Oh, I am tired of sitting and I don't want a life-size portrait of myself, is speech. But then all of the rest of this is intervening prose, and then there's more speech. So the speech tag is probably not particularly appropriate for use in prose like this. So let's delete that. So you could tag this as a quotation, or you could leave the quotation marks in there. Those are probably the two main options here. Okay, I think maybe we'll stop there. Those are the basic things you do. The basic ways in which the three basic ways in which you can add an element are either to type that element. I just typed angle bracket P, close angle bracket there, and notice that it gave me the closing P tag as well. The second way is to press Command E and just say it's a P, so it puts in another one for me. And the most useful way is to highlight some text and then say, well, let's highlight Oscar Wilde up here, and then press Command E that wraps the element around the text that you had highlighted. And to add an attribute, you can either press space and just type it quickly enough that you get it wrong, or you can press space, and wait for the list of attributes available to come up, and then you can select one from that list, and we can say rend update or whatever as some information on there. I think that's enough. Anything to add, Christopher?
I think something that comes up a lot is that people wonder about using empty LB elements as against using line elements and how those differ from L elements. So could you just talk through that?
Yeah, so they mean different things. LB is telling you that this is where a line begins on your manuscript, or on whatever surface your text is written on your inscription or whatever. The L element, which also stands for line, is an element that wraps a line, and it wraps a line of verse specifically, which may or may not be the same as a line on the page or on the manuscript. And the line element, if I remember correctly, is part of the facsimile module, and that's for tagging sections of a document that you of an image, effectively, of a document that you want to match to the image. And so we're not going to talk about the facsimile element in this course, but
I've also seen people use the line element for diplomatic transcriptions, where you want a really precise element for the representation of each line in an image. But yeah, you're right.
Which is generally analogous to what we're doing with facsimile. That's what I was sort of dismissing that all under the heading of facsimile. But yes, you're right. It's facsimile or documentary or diplomatic. Yeah.
Great. Thanks.
Cool. Okay. Thank you. Cheers.